There is a suggestion that we should be somewhat concerned because the Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Nzimande, has plans for universities which may not necessarily be congruent with academic freedom. Are you concerned at all about that?
You're pointing to a comment I made in my inaugural lecture, which was in 2008, and it was a time when we were particularly concerned about a whole lot of state intervention in the judiciary, questioning the Constitution. Our confidence in the safety of the Constitution was being shaken, and also academic freedom. And so it's a good question, because in my sense is that we went through a few years where that anxiety level dropped. Actually, we weren't so anxious about it. But in the last year and a half, we've become very anxious again. And there have been two particular interventions. One has been the Protection of Information, so-called Protection of Information Bill, which what we've called the Secrecy Bill, which has had a whole lot of elements that threatened academic freedom, as well as the possibility of doing research, of accessing information, accessing archives. And I think, fortunately, we rose to that challenge, the university, the students. We went on marches, we wrote the papers, we went to present to the Portfolio Committee, I presented to Parliament as well, and that bill has been substantially amended. So while it's not perfect, I have to say that if I needed evidence of where citizen action can make a difference, that's a good example of it. And the university played its part in that. The second has been this Amendment Act, which was passed into law in December last year, which gives the Minister of Higher Education the right to suspend councils, suspend vice-chancellors, if they don't do what he wants them to do. Let me just have some water.
Yeah, sure.
The Minister says that this is for universities in crisis. And indeed, there have been a number of universities in crisis. We've had 4 in the last few years where he suspended the council, suspended the vice-chancellor, took over, appointed an administrator. And I have to say that in those 4 cases, I think he did the right thing. And the minister is sometimes in a difficult position. These are public universities, and if universities are being bankrupted, or if there's corruption, there's tenders to members of council and people being appointed. A vice-chancellor, they wanted to appoint one council who had a fake PhD that he'd bought, and I think it was right for the minister to intervene. So there's a fine line between that and...
But the powers are greater than that.
The powers are greater.
He can define, I mean, he could kick you out of office.
So my concern is that he's taken what was a legitimate concern, which was the need to be able to step in and address problems and suspend councils. But then he's added in some clauses, and one of the clauses he's added in says that if he thinks that the university isn't meeting its duty of equity to those to whom it owes such a duty, then he can issue a directive, he or she, the minister, can issue a directive that the university must honour that commitment of equity. And if they don't, then he must suspend the council. Now, if you decode that, a commitment of equity might mean the need to admit a student who comes from a designated group, who the university doesn't think should be admitted, maybe for other reasons, but he thinks there's a duty of equity, and so he takes over through that admissions policies of universities. It might mean the demand to promote an academic who is, let's say, a senior lecturer to an associate professor, and he may think that the university is discriminating on racial grounds or other grounds, and so that the duty of equity isn't being honoured, and intervene to do that. So I think that as it stands, it's dangerous, and we've been meeting with the minister. He's agreed to a working group to relook at it, because we've said, and our council, to the credit of the Archbishop and the council, has said that if we can't get the Act changed through this negotiation, then we would go to court to challenge it.
And you see, some of us are old enough to remember acts that didn't mean what they said, such as the extension of the Universities Act, which meant the restriction of the universities, or the Movement of Population Act, which actually was influx control. Now, so, one's got to be, what goes around comes around. Will this university... what I'm asking, I suppose, is this. You're not going to sit there in a smoke-filled room with the minister and just deal with this. And if you don't get your way, that's it. Will the university, in fact, organise properly to resist this kind of encroachment?
Yeah,
And I don't mean just courts. I don't think courts are necessarily the only way you should go.
Well, I think we will, although I don't think we want to go into this negotiation with the Minister with a threat. We
I'm
don't
not
want
asking for threats. I'm just interested in what your default position is.
Yeah, I think the default position would be to call students out to protest, to call faculty out to protest. I suspect that the protest in this environment might be less effective than the court action, but we would also have to get enough other universities together that would join us. It's not a battle
Far less
just for
costly, I should
UCT.
tell you, to protest than to go to court.
Yeah,